The coordinate came over the radio at 19 minutes past 1 in the morning, and there was no patient attached to it. "Say again the nature of the call," Joe Larkin said. Gil Prosser read it to her a second time. "A latitude, a longitude, a field elevation of 4,900 feet. No age, no complaint, no receiving hospital, no trooper on scene, no number to call. Gil, that is the north shoulder of Wolverine. That is a snow shelf under a rock wall. There is not a road within 20 miles of it." "I know what it is." "Then tell me who is dying up there." The frequency stayed open. She could hear him breathing. Gil Prosser had been reading her coordinates for 11 years through 2 engine failures and 100 bad nights, and he had never once let a silence sit on the air like that. "Fly it, Joe," he said. "Please." Behind her in the red light of the cabin, Betty Chun leaned forward against her harness, with her headset cord swinging, and Corey Ives stopped repacking the airway bag and looked up. The snow came at the windscreen out of the black, in long horizontal lines. 20 below on the outside air gauge, and falling. Joe put her hand back on the stick, and turned the machine toward the mountain that had eaten her life. She had not said no to a flight in 5 years. Everybody in that hangar knew it, and nobody said it out loud. They came up the valley low under the cloud, following the frozen creek, because the creek was the only thing in that country that would tell her where the ground was. The searchlight lit a corridor of falling snow that ended 6 feet from the nose. The ridgeline came out of the dark on both sides and squeezed them, and the airframe began to shudder in the wind coming off the wall. And Bet Chun stopped talking in the back. Then the flares. They were laid out on the shelf in a landing T, 11 of them burning red holes through the blowing snow. And they were laid out correctly, not thrown, not scattered, spaced by pace, aligned into the wind. The touchdown point marked clean. "Somebody down there had brought in a medevac before," Joe Bet said quietly. "There is no vehicle. There is no cabin. There is no anything." "I know." She should have pulled power and gone home. Then she thought about a man saying please on an open frequency, and she brought the aircraft around into the wind and set it on the snow as gently as she had ever set anything down in her life. The men came out of the black timber before the skids had finished settling. 6 of them in long dark coats, gone white to the knee, unhurried walking in a spread, the way men walk who have practiced walking that way. Nobody drew a weapon, nobody shouted. The cabin door slid open, and her nurse and her medic climbed down into the drift and were walked away toward the trees, with a man's hand under each of their arms, like an usher at a wedding. She had the collective in her left fist, and 1,100 feet of clean air off the shelf in front of her, and she could have been gone in 4 seconds. The right cockpit door opened instead. He got in the way a man gets into his own truck, sat down, pulled the door shut against the wind, and the noise of the world dropped by half. He was tall and made long rather than heavy in a black overcoat with the collar turned up, hatless, black hair gone wet and pushed straight back off a high forehead. A long, hard face, a mouth that did not do anything at all. His eyes were a pale, flat brown with the warmth burned out of them, and when they came around to her, they did not change by any amount she could measure. He took a folded chart out of his coat, brushed the snow off it with 2 fingers, and laid it on the console under the instrument lights. An old flight plan, the paper gone the color of weak tea. And down in the bottom corner, in small square block capitals, in her own handwriting, the word weather, and a set of initials and a date in November, 5 years ago. Joe Larkin stopped breathing. "Start the clock again," the man said. "Who are you?" "Fly the route." "Get out of my aircraft." He did not move, and he did not raise his voice. "Your nurse and your medic are in the second truck. They are warm. They will be at the field before you are." He looked out at the flares burning down into the snow. "You filed that plan at 7:40 in the evening. Anchorage to Ptarmigan Bend high over the top at 11,000. At 10:40 you scrubbed it and wrote that word and went home, and a 24-year-old took the airplane through the pass at 7,000 instead, and 12 people died." 11, Joe said. Her lips were numb. 11 people died. Something moved through his face then, so fast and so far down that she almost missed it. "Fly the route," he said. She flew them off that shelf, with her hands shaking so badly she had to lock her wrist against her knee. and she did not say one word for 40 minutes, and the man in the right seat never once took his eyes off her. He had them put down at Merrill Field at 3:10. 3 black trucks were parked on her company's apron with their lights off, and every window in the hangar was dark except the dispatch office, where Gil Prosser sat with his hands flat on the blotter and a young man in a good coat standing behind his chair. Bet and Corey were in the crew room with coffee, and a man in the doorway. They took her helmet bag, her telephone, her kneeboard, her logbook. They put her in the flight planning room with the big lighted table and the wall of charts, and the man from the right seat came in and stood on the far side of it for 2 hours and dismantled her. He asked her the route. She gave it to him. He asked her again 9 minutes later in a different order and listened to hear whether the numbers moved. Fuel load, freezing level, forecast tops, the alternate, what time the telephone call had come and who had been on the other end of it. A pilot report, Joe said. Severe rime icing 4,000 to 9,040 miles north of the pass, called in at 10:40 at night. Called in by whom? I do not know. It came through the company. Somebody at the desk took it and rang me at home. You remember the freezing level, 5 years later, to the 100 feet. He said it flatly, not an accusation, worse than an accusation. You do not remember the name of the person who ended 11 lives. 12, Joe said. You said 12. He looked at her for a long moment across the lighted table. Say the icing report again, he said, the same way. She said it again. He made her say it a third time, and a fourth, and somewhere in the fourth telling her stomach went cold, because he was not trying to catch her out on the facts, he was listening to the shape of it. He was listening for a rehearsed sentence. He thought she had been bought. You think somebody paid me to stay on the ground. I think somebody needed a different pilot in that airplane. I have been paid nothing. Her voice cracked and she hated it. I have flown 1,100 medevac hours in 5 years and never once turned down a call in any weather because a boy I signed off 8 days earlier took my airplane into that pass and I let him. I do not want your money. I want you off my field. Josephine Larkin, he said. My name is Roman Sarkeesian. She knew the name. Everybody in that town knew the name. The fuel barges that freight the winter roads, the long, dark warehouses at the far end of the port that nobody ever asked about. She had refueled at strips he owned without ever knowing whose asphalt she stood on. There were 12 people on that airplane, Roman Sarkeesian said. The safety board says 11. The newspapers say 11. The stone in the memorial garden says 11, because the 12th was loaded at the federal hangar without a name and put in the back row with an escort, and there is no line for him anywhere in the world, except one. He put a photograph on the lighted table. A loading manifest, a working document with grease on it, the kind the ramp crew fills in with a ballpoint, 11 names. And under the 11th, a 12th line with no name at all, only a weight and 2 letters and a seat. Joe Larkin looked at that 12th line for a long time. Who was he? She said. He was 23 years old, Roman said, and he was my brother, and I am the one who told him to get on that airplane. She flew the first search leg the following night, and she flew it because of that piece of paper, and for no other reason, and she made him understand it. I am not for hire, she told him on the ramp in the snow. This is a medical aircraft with a hospital's name on the tail, and I am not going to steal it for you. You will lease it from my company at the published rate through the front door in daylight with a signature, and the signature is going to be yours. Roman Sarkeesian looked at her the way a man looks at something that has just done arithmetic he did not think it could do. Why mine? Because if I go into that mountain, I want a piece of paper in a filing cabinet in Anchorage, with the name of the man who sent me there, written on it in his own hand. For the first time in 2 days, something at the corner of his mouth moved 1/4 inch. Bring me the form, he said. The pass at night, in a January storm, is not a place, it is an animal. Joe took them in at 4,000 feet on the south side, where the rock gives a little lee, and the mountain wave came off the ridge and took 800 feet away from them in 11 seconds, and she flew out of it sideways, along a wall of rock she could not see on nothing but the picture in her head. When they were level again, the aircraft smelled like hot metal. Roman Sarkeesian had not made a sound. His right hand was closed on the grab handle above the door so hard the tendons stood up along the back of it. Not on the way in. Now. After. The airplane did not fly into that mountain, Joe said when she could talk. not the way they wrote it. Explain that. They found the fuselage on the lower slope at 5,600 and wrote it up as flight into terrain pilot pressed on into weather. She banked them into the lee and held it there. But a wave like the one that just had us does not put you into the hill in front of you. It puts you down and then across. Everything they never found is not ahead of the wreck. It is behind it, 2 miles back up the pass, and it is in the ice. He turned in the seat and looked at her, and it was the first time she had seen anything at all in that face. Say that again, he said. She said it again. Where? Sable Cirque, 7,100. A hanging ice field under the col that nobody looks at because there is nothing up there and no way to walk to it. She wiped the inside of the windscreen with her glove. I have flown past it 400 times and never once turned my light on it, and I could not have told you why until tonight. He did not answer for a mile. You could have told me, he said. You did not want to see it. By the third day, a hard line had opened between the men working out of the north hangar, who understood what she was doing, and the men who thought she was a taxi. Nico Adamian was 28. He signed for the fuel truck on the second night and told the driver to fill her both tanks all the way, because more fuel is more fuel, and men like Nico believe that the way they believe in gravity. Joe read the ticket on the ramp at 9 in the evening and went white. Defuel it. 420 pounds out of that aircraft right now. It is full. It is overweight for a hover at 7,000 feet, with 2 men and a hoist, and there is nothing in this world to be done about that except take the fuel out. She never shouted. She was shouting. I do not care what you paid. Physics did not take your money. Nico put his hand flat on her chest and pushed her back a step from the fuel panel and said something short about women who talk too much on other people's airfields. Nobody afterward could agree about how fast Roman Sarkeesian crossed that ramp. He did not shout either. He took the young man's wrist, the hand that had done it, and folded it back against the fuel panel, and there was a sound like a dry stick going in a fire. He crouched beside him in the snow unhurried and waited for the screaming to become breathing. Every number that woman says is now a number I have said, he told him. Do you understand what that means? Anton Kesh, who had been at his shoulder for 19 years, watched it with his face carefully empty, and then went and got the fuel truck himself. That night Joe Larkin went up with a hoist and a man on a strop and put a spotlight into the Sable Cirque for 11 minutes before the snow closed it and found nothing, and came home with ice in the intake screens. Roman Sarkeesian was standing at the edge of the pad when she came in. He had been standing there for 2 hours and 40 minutes, in 20 below, with a handheld radio in his fist, and his coat gone white across the shoulders. And when Anton Kesh brought a truck up beside him and opened the door, he had not turned around. She saw it through the windscreen on short final, and something went through her that she did not have a name for, and did not want one. The next morning she brought a 71-year-old man named Ellery Fitch out of a trailer at the end of the field, one leg ruined on a gravel bar, in 1988, and put him in a chair in the north hangar with a mug of tea and every chart of the Wolverine drainage anybody had ever drawn. He is going to get you killed, Josie. Somebody already did that, 5 years ago. Drink your tea. Ellery Fitch had flown that pass since before she was born. He put a pencil on the chart and drew a line no survey had ever drawn, an old smuggler's line, the one that runs under the wind instead of across it. Roman stood behind his chair without a word for 40 minutes listening, and when the old man finally noticed him, he went the color of the tea. It is all right, Roman said. Keep drawing. That was the last soft thing he did for 4 days. Because on the 5th day they found nothing, and on the 6th day they found nothing, and something in him closed like a door. You are weather knowledge, he said in the hangar in front of 6 of his own men when she asked him whether his brother had been afraid of flying. That is what you are in this. You are the piece of information about this mountain I could not buy anywhere else. Nothing else in it belongs to you. She stood there with the cold coming through the hangar doors and let it land. Understood, she said. 2 nights off, he said. The machine needs an inspection. Kesh will take you home. They put her in her own house with 2 men in a car at the end of the driveway. She slept 14 hours, woke at 2 in the morning with her heart going, and went to the kitchen window for water. There was a truck across the street with its engine off. 20 below and the engine off, because a running engine makes a plume, and a plume can be seen a long way in that kind of air. She watched the shape of the man behind that wheel until the sky went the color of dirty milk over the inlet, and then he drove away without once starting the heater. The second night, she carried a thermos out and knocked on the glass. The window came down 4 inches. He looked at it and did not take it. "Go inside," Roman Sarkeesian said. "You are going to freeze out here for a woman who has only weather knowledge." The window went up. She left the thermos on the hood, and in the morning it was gone, and there were 2 cigarette ends in the snow from a man who did not smoke. They flew again on the 8th night and the 9th, and by then he had stopped sitting in the right seat like a passenger. He had learned the checklist. He read it to her from the laminated card, badly at first, then well, in that flat, calm voice, and at some point she stopped correcting him because he had stopped being wrong. He learned to call the altitudes into the circ and to watch the torque gauge and say the number without editorial. On the 9th night coming home down the valley, with the wind behind them and the world quiet for the first time in a week, Joe looked across, and Roman Sarkeesian was asleep, head back against the seat, hands open in his lap. Asleep like a man who had been carrying a wardrobe up a staircase for 5 years and had just put it down at the top. She flew the smoothest 20 minutes of her career. When she pulled the throttles back at Merrill Field, Anton Kesh was standing at the edge of the apron in the ground lights, and he looked at that right seat through the windscreen, and then at Joe, and the look on that man's face was close to terror. "Not since his father," Kesh said afterward in the hangar while Roman was walking the tail. 20 years and I have been in a room with that man asleep exactly never." He was not warning her exactly. Be careful what you do with it. After that it was every night. He would not eat until she ate, which she noticed because she never ate. He came to the flight planning room at 4 in the afternoon and sat across the lighted table doing her arithmetic with a pencil wrong and pushed it over for her to correct. And he began asking her over and over to say the same 11 words. "Say the report again. Severe rime, 4 to 9040, north of the pass, 1040 at night." Again. Roman. Again. She said it in the hangar. She said it at 7,000 feet, with the searchlight scraping the ice. She said it once at 3 in the morning with her forehead on the flight table and her eyes shut. And every time the man beside her went somewhere she could not follow and came back with his jaw set. On the 11th night, he did not take her to the aircraft. He took her to a steel roller door at the far end of the north hangar that she had assumed was a paint store and stood with the key in his hand a while before he used it. "There is a version of this where you never see behind this door," he said. "In that version, you go home in 3 days and I never say your name again. Do you want that version?" "No." "Be certain. Open the door, Roman." He opened the door. It was a bay the size of a basketball court, and there was a grid painted on the concrete floor, white lines, hand-painted numbered along both edges, and laid out on that grid, on low wooden pallets, was an airplane. Not all of it, perhaps a third. Scorched aluminum, a bent propeller blade, a seat frame, a section of belly skin with the paint still on it in strips, every piece set in its true position, relative to every other piece. 5 years of a man buying scrap out of a federal storage lot through 11 different companies and carrying it home, a pallet at a time. The nose of that ghost airplane pointed at the roller door. On the long wall there were 11 photographs, ordinary ones, a school picture, a fishing picture, a woman at a birthday table, and beside the 11th, a blank square of tape with nothing in it at all. Pinned next to them was a radar plot, worn soft along one fold, a pencil line with a circle at the end of it, and the paper inside that circle rubbed through to nothing by a thumb. And on the table under the window, there was a file with her name on it. Joe opened it before he could tell her not to. 5 years of her flight logs, every medevac she had flown, 1 line each. A letter from her own chief pilot grounding her 14 days for accepting a call at minimums. With a note clipped to it in a hand she now knew 3 words long. Keep her flying. A copy of the deed on her house bought 2 years ago by an entity she had never heard of, and leased back to her at a rent she had once thought was a miracle. And a photograph taken from across a street of her own truck parked outside a small blue house on a Sunday morning, with her sitting behind the wheel of it, not getting out. That house belonged to Verna Osgood, the mother of a 24-year-old named Denny, who had taken an airplane into a mountain. And Joe Larkin had parked outside it every Sunday for 5 years, and had never once been able to make herself walk up the path. "How long?" Joe said. 3 years. Why? Roman Sarkeesian stood in the middle of that painted grid, with his hands at his sides, and the thing that had been behind his face since the snow shelf came out into the open at last. Because I needed a pilot who could fly that Cirque, he said, and there is exactly one of those, and for 3 years I made certain nothing in this town killed her before I got to her. That is the answer I have been giving myself. It is not the true one. He took a folded paper out of the inside pocket of his coat. Over the heart the place a man keeps a thing he touches every day, and the paper was soft as cloth, from being opened and closed. It was the original flight release, not the copy he had put on her console in the snow. The original. Her block capitals the word, whether her initials. I have carried that for 3 years, he said, and I could not decide whether to burn it or bring it to you. Listen to what I say now, because I came up that mountain in a blizzard to say it to your face, and then could not do it for 11 days. Say it. There was no icing report. The hangar went very quiet. No record at the weather service, no tape, no airplane filed a position within 80 miles of that coordinate at 10:40 at night, and I have the radar for that whole sector, and the sky out there was empty. He put his hand flat on the paper. A man picked up a telephone. He knew Joe Larkin flies the top of the pass at 11,000, and he needed that airplane down in the notch at 7, so he made one call to a company desk and handed a woman with a conscience a piece of information she had no way to check. You did not fail that night. You did the only correct thing anybody did that night. You have been serving 5 years for a crime that was committed against you. She sat down on the floor of that hangar on the white painted grid in the middle of a dead airplane, and she came apart. He did not touch her. He crouched a yard away with his forearms across his knees and stayed there while it went through her. All of it. 5 years of it. And when she finally got her breath, he was still exactly that far away and no closer. And that was somehow the most enormous thing anyone had ever done for her. Why did you not tell me on the first night, she said. Because on the first night I thought you had made that call yourself, Roman said. And because a man who has believed something for 5 years does not put it down for a paper. He puts it down for a person. I had to see you fly. They found the tail on the 12th night. It was 38 below, and the wind was down for the first time in 2 weeks, that dead flat, cold air the mountain gets between storms. Joe brought them along Ellery Fitch's smuggler's line, under the wind 300 feet off the ice, and put the searchlight on the ice field at the base of the call. And there was a shadow up there that had not been there in 5 years of her not looking. The ice had carried it down. Whatever fell into that bowl 5 years ago had been riding a river of ice toward the Bergschrund at an inch or two a day, and it had come out of the white the way a body comes up in spring, standing out of the glacier at an angle like a headstone. An aircraft tail. Vertical fin most of the stabilizer, the last 11 feet of fuselage, the paint still on it. Joe Larkin put the aircraft into a hard bank against that wall of white, with the light burning down on it, and heard a sound come out of her own throat that she did not recognize. Roman Sarkeesian's hand closed on her shoulder over the harness strap and stayed there, and neither of them said one word for a full minute, hanging in the dark against 7,100 feet of mountain, with the light on 12 people's last address. "Can you get a man onto that?" he said finally. "I can get a man onto that." "Then get me onto that." "Not tonight." She was already turning them out. "Tonight, I take a photograph and we go home, because if I try that hover on the fuel I have left, there will be 2 airplanes up here for the ice to eat." He looked at her. "Yes, Captain," he said. It took 2 nights to get the recorder out. They put Anton Kesh on the strop with a bar and a battery saw, and Joe held a hover at 7,100 feet in air so thin the machine wallowed like a boat, 90 seconds at a time, 4 passes a night. On the 6th pass, Kesh came up on the hoist with a scorched orange box the size of a shoebox, in a cargo net and a hard-sided case chained to a length of aluminum frame. The case had a wrist strap on it. There was still a glove in the wrist strap. They laid both on a blanket on a workbench in the north hangar like patients, and let them come up to temperature while nobody in that building slept. A specialist Roman had flown up from Seattle, a nervous man in a cardigan who never gave his name, worked until 4 in the morning, and then set the headphones down on the wood. "You will want to hear the last minute yourselves." Once. Joe put them on. She heard the engines. She heard the shudder of ice on the airframe. She heard a young man's voice she had last heard in a crew room saying he was going to try one more time for the top. Cheerful, scared, 24 years old. And she heard a man in the cabin behind him say a name. Then she heard a bang, not the mountain. Not a blade strike, not the long, tearing noise an airplane makes going into a hill. A single, flat, concussive bang from behind the cabin. Then the roar of a pressure vessel going out through a hole in the world. Everything loose in that airplane going aft, the controls, dead in a boy's hands, and 11 seconds of a young pilot doing everything exactly right, with nothing left to do it with. The tail had come off first. At 7,100 feet, 2 miles before the wreck, Joe took the headphones off, set them down very carefully, and put both hands flat on the bench. The case was worse. Inside it, in dry, frozen order, was the kit of a deputy marshal named Tobias Hale, who had been sitting in the back row 5 years ago with a 23-year-old in his custody. A movement authorization for 1 protected witness transport by air routing through Wolverine. No manifest entry, no local notification. A property receipt for a sealed equipment case loaded at the federal hangar by persons unnamed. And a proffer transcript, 30 pages, in which a boy called Savan described watching a federal supervisor take cash on a dock at the port of Anchorage, twice, and named him. And on the movement order, on the signature line in blue ballpoint, a signature and a printed name. Roman Sarkeesian read that name and did not move at all. He stood with the paper in both hands for maybe 30 seconds, and then he set it down on the blanket beside the recorder and laid his palm flat on it, the way you would hold a lid on something. Joe came around the bench and read it upside down, and her hands went cold. Wade Ostrander. No, she said. You know that name, Roman. Her voice had gone strange. He is in my kitchen. He has been in my kitchen every Thursday since October. Wade Ostrander had come to her door 3 months earlier, with snow on his hat and a way of standing on a doorstep that made you open the door wider. 61, silver hair cut short, half glasses, a soft, flat voice. The safety board was reopening the file at the request of the families he had said. Some of those families were angry, and anger had a way of finding pilots. He had given her a telephone, a plain prepaid one in a blister pack, and asked her to keep it on her, in the aircraft at work, at night, so they could always reach her. He had called her Josephine, which nobody had called her since her mother died. He had brought his own coffee cup every week, and washed it in her sink before he left. And every single Thursday, gently, he had asked whether anybody had contacted her about the crash. The telephone, Roman said. They took it off me the first night. It has been in a drawer at the field for 2 weeks. They found it in the dispatch office, in the second drawer of a desk, plugged into a charger nobody at that company had bought. Gil Prosser sat in his chair with his hands flat on the blotter and did not even try. $300 a week. Just your flight times, Joe. Just where you went. He told me he was protecting you. You read me a coordinate with no patient on it, Gil. They had my daughter's address. Roman looked at the old man for a moment. He is not the one, he said to Kesh. Put him in a room and feed him. Wade Ostrander came to the field himself at 11 the next morning in daylight, with his coat over his arm. That was the thing about him. He came alone. Joe met him on the apron because Roman had told her not to, and they stood by the fuel island with the wind off the inlet and the mountains, white and enormous to the north, and Wade Ostrander smiled at her the way an uncle smiles. Josephine, you have had a busy month. I have. You want to be careful with that family, he said kindly, sadly. I have watched that man work for 11 years. He finds the one person in a story who is carrying something heavy, and he picks it up for them. And after that, they belong to him. He put his hands in his pockets. I hear you have been up in the Wolverine at night. That mountain has taken enough off you. It has. Come with me for the day. Let me put you somewhere quiet until the hearing. You have my word. And Joe Larkin, who had spent 5 years being the most honest woman in Alaska, heard herself say easily, there is nothing up there. I went up because he paid. I flew a grid, and there is nothing in that bowl but ice. Something crossed Wade Ostrander's face, relief. And then because he was 61 and tired and had been carrying it as long as she had, one sentence too many. Of course there is nothing, he said. It came apart at 7,100 feet, Josephine. Anything that came off it went into the crevasse field years ago. The wind blew across the fuel island. The report says the aircraft struck terrain at 5,600, Joe said. In one piece. There is not one document in the world that says 7,100. They stood there looking at each other, and she watched the kindness come off that man's face in a single piece like a decal. "Get in the car," Josephine Wade Ostrander said. She flew that afternoon. She flew because the specialist had made 3 copies, and Roman wanted one in the hands of a federal prosecutor in Fairbanks by dark, and no vehicle was leaving Anchorage on any road without being stopped. The only clean way out of that valley was up. They put a state contract helicopter on her at 4,000 feet in the pass, and it was not a state contract crew. She heard the rotor before she saw it, that second beat under her own, and then it came out of the cloud on her left with the door open, and a man kneeling in it, and the first burst went through the tail boom, took her yaw pedals half away and filled the cabin with the smell of hydraulic fluid burning on the exhaust. "Hold on," Joe said, and put the aircraft on its side and down the wall. She flew that machine into the Sable Cirque with no tail rotor authority and put it on the only flat ice in that bowl, in a hard spinning arrival that broke the left skid and slid them 40 feet, and the rotor wound down, and the silence up there was enormous. The other aircraft went around and put 4 men on the ice, 200 yards away. Roman had the case and the recorder and the copies in a canvas bag between his boots. He got it open, took out one flat orange envelope, and put it into her hands. "Your machine will fly," he said. "Not well, it will fly. Downhill out of the bowl, down the old line, and there is nobody on that line. Because nobody but a dead man and an old man know it exists. Roman. They have to come across 200 yards of open ice." He was already checking a pistol against his thigh, with the flat competence of a man doing something he has done too many times. "I am going to make that a long walk. You will die on this ice." "Then I will die on this ice with the right answer in the air," Roman Sarkeesian said. "And 12 people will get their names read out, and one of them will be a boy I put on an airplane, and one of them will be a boy you signed off, and you will not spend one more Sunday sitting in a truck outside a blue house." He put his hand behind her neck, and for 1 second in 5 years, somebody held Joe Larkin's head still. "Fly," he said, and got out into the wind and shut the door. She flew. She got that broken machine off the ice in a flat, sliding lurch and dropped it over the lip of the Cirque into the fall line the way Ellery Fitch had drawn it, and the mountain took her down the pass with the tail hunting like a dog on a lead. She was 4 miles out with a clean radio and an orange envelope on her knee that would put Wade Ostrander in a federal courtroom for the rest of his life. She counted to 11. Then she rolled that aircraft up on its side and took it back up the pass. Anton Kesh, who came in on the second machine 11 minutes later, said she used the aircraft the way a man uses a shovel. She came over the call with the light on, and the snow of the whole bowl going up in front of her, and she brought a 100-mile-an-hour rotor wash down across 200 yards of open ice and turned it into a whiteout no man on foot could stand up in. And she held it there, low on the edge of the mountain with no tail rotor for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. When it cleared, 3 men were on their faces, and one was gone over the edge of the ice, and Roman Sarkeesian was on one knee in the snow with a hole through the outside of his thigh, bleeding into ice that would not take it. She could not land. She held it a foot off the ice with the broken skid hanging, and screamed at him through the open door, and he came across the last 20 feet of that mountain, and fell into the cabin, and she was airborne before his legs were inside. He lay on the cabin floor bleeding through her hands, while she flew one-handed down the pass. "You were 4 miles out," he said. His voice had gone thin. "You had it. You had all of it." "Yes." "Why did you come back?" "Because you signed the form," Joe Larkin said. "I told you on the first night. Your name is on the piece of paper that sent me up there, Roman. That means you are mine to bring down." The federal prosecutor in Fairbanks had a copy at 8 minutes past 6 that evening. The second went to the safety board. The third went at Roman Sarkeesian's instruction to the one newspaper in that state that had run Joe Larkin's photograph on the front page 5 years earlier, under the word "grounded." They arrested Wade Ostrander in a hotel in Juneau 4 days before he was to be sworn in as a regional director, and the file that was supposed to be sealed for 75 years came open instead, and a lot of men in that country stopped sleeping. It cost him. Sivan's proffer ran 30 pages, and 11 of them were about his own family, and Roman handed it over entire without a line blacked out, and it took 2 years and most of what he owned. He did it, she understood, eventually, because the pages that cleared Joe Larkin and the pages that buried his own house were the same pages, and he had chosen which of the two he was willing to lose. 11 days before she knew there was a choice. In April, they raised the tail out of the Sable Cirque in daylight, in a sling under a clear sky, and 12 names went up on the stone in the memorial garden instead of 11. Joe stood beside Verna Osgood while they read them, and when they read Denny's, the woman took her hand and did not give it back. Roman stood at the back of that crowd with a stick and a leg that would never be right again, and would not go forward because he had put a boy on an airplane and had decided that his place was at the back. Joe went and got him and walked him up to the front anyway. In June there was a helicopter on a gravel bar on the Upper Wolverine, with the doors off and a man in shirt sleeves in the shade of it, coiling a load line wrong. "That is going to nod on you at 400 feet, Joe said from the pilot's seat. "It is." "Then let it. I want to watch." She pushed her sunglasses up into her hair. "Read me the checklist." He read it correctly, in that flat, calm voice, every line. And when he got to the bottom, he did not put the card down. Josephine. Roman. On the shelf in the snow the first night. He was looking out at the mountain that had cost them both everything. "I had the tape in my coat, and your release in my coat, and 11 days of things to say to you, and what came out of me was an order. I have given orders my whole life. I have never once asked anyone for anything. Ask me now." The wind came down the bar and moved the grass around the skids. "Do not fly that pass without me in this seat," Roman Sarkeesian said. "Ever again. That is not an order." "No," he said, "it is not." She started the engine, and that night, in a locked room at the back of a house in Anchorage, a lawyer went through the last envelope out of Tobias Hale's case, the one nobody had gotten to, and saw for the first time that under Wade Ostrander's signature there was a second signature line and a second name struck through with a pin so heavily the paper had torn. The lawyer made a telephone call. It rang in a truck on a dark road outside Anchorage. And the man in that truck listened and looked across at the woman asleep in the passenger seat with her boots on the dash, and said very quietly that he would handle it himself and that she was never to be told. "If this one kept you in the cockpit right to the end, stay a little longer. The next story is colder than this one, and it starts with a woman who should have hung up the telephone. Tell me in the comments the exact moment you knew he was never going to leave her."